everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to BuzzBack's latest webinar, Is Connecting to Your Consumer Keeping You Up at Night? An Agile ANU Sleep Aid Study. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. We'll be fielding questions at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to submit questions via the Q&A icon on your screen. As a reminder, today's call is being recorded and will be offered at the conclusion of our event. I'd like to take this time to introduce you to Rob Siebold, Research Director of our BuzzBack Europe office. With 20 plus years insights experience, Rob has held a variety of senior agency roles. Rob joined BuzzBack in 2012 and leads on healthcare at BuzzBack Europe. Rob has a wide experience in global insights and has worked at agencies in the UK and Australia, including RSGB, TNS, and Research International, all now a part of Kantar. His specialisms include innovation and NPD, market landscape, and understanding and brand communications development. Rob, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Melanie, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you'll find something of interest in our exploratory study, which we've done into the sleep aid category. So here we go. So we're going to start with just laying out what we're going to cover. So I'm going to do a brief introduction and background. So just a couple of slides on BuzzBack, and then an intro into what we did and how we did it and why we chose the topic that we did. Then we'll spend most of the time going through the findings or the highlights of the findings from this study. And then we'll wrap it up with some key learnings and questions. Okay, so just a little bit about BuzzBack to begin with. At BuzzBack, we recognize the world is changing rapidly. The fast pace of modern life means that it's becoming ever harder to gain quality attention. And that's whether you're a brand trying to break through in a crowded category, or whether, like us, you're an insights agency trying to get good quality attention from respondents. So to make things easier for consumers, we make it easy for them to participate in ways that are relevant to them and ways that they are communicating in daily life. So we make sure that we connect via online and mobile whenever we can. The other thing that we do is we use creative and interactive exercises to engage consumers more, so that when we do have their time, we get better and richer feedback. Our techniques that we build into our studies are visual and interactive engagement techniques. And these reflect, you can see a few of them on the screen here. These reflect essentially the way people are interacting in modern life. So they're highly visual and they're gamified and they're interactive. So e-collage, for example, uses images a bit like Instagram or Facebook, so people can tell stories through images. And then Swipe, for example, uses a swipe interface, a bit like Tinder or other dating apps, or indeed many other apps that are out there today. So we our auditive work better. So they all follow a similar principle, which is that people use images as catalysts to help them to access thoughts, associations, and feelings that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise tell us, and to help talk about those. And we'll be sharing a couple of these types of activities in our study. So why have we focused on the OTC category? Well, going back to that point about the hectic pace of modern life, well, one of the main things that's suffering is our sleep. And you can see from the figures here that a significant proportion of the population is suffering from sleep issues, which raises some big questions. What does getting good sleep mean to people? How does it impact the quality of their lives? And what are some of the kind of solutions and routines that people are turning to help them sleep better? And indeed, how effective are these? And these are the sorts of questions that we're going to be covering today. As a consequence of that ever-growing issue, the sleep aid market is also a significant and growing market. Again, we've got some numbers here. So just in the US alone, in 2018, so last year, the sleep aid market was worth $67 billion US, and that's projected to grow at about 6% or more per year, reaching something around $91 billion by 2023. So a significant category. So when we're talking about sleep aids, what we're really talking about is different types of treatments. And for the purposes of our study, what we're talking about are prescription medication to help people sleep, over-the-counter products and sleep aids, various supplements, natural and otherwise, and indeed some other things such as lifestyle approaches and some other related routine elements that you'll see in our study. But remember, the focus of our study is going to be over-the-counter sleep aids, but we want to frame that in a broader context of broader approaches that people are using to get better sleep. Okay, so into our study now. So in terms of our objective, what we wanted to do was to do a broad foundational learning study into the sleep aid category, and we wanted to approach it very much from a consumer or sufferer perspective. So it's a human-centric approach. It's not so much a category-led approach. It's really trying to understand the people and their motivations and their problems and their needs. So what you're going to learn today are some of the highlights of the study. Clearly, we can't communicate it all in 25 minutes, but certainly you'll get a good understanding of some of the foundational experiences of people in sleep and in the sleep aid category. You get a bit more of an understanding of sufferers as people, so what motivates them and how does sleep impact their lives. We get some detailed product information, so what are they using, what are they turning to help them to sleep better, what's in their routine, and why. And for the purposes of this study, we've used some of our engagement techniques to do a deep dive into the emotions particularly. So what does it feel like when you have good sleep? What does it feel like when you have bad sleep? And of course, we want to end up with some learning, so we're going to look at unmet needs and opportunities for OTC brands. Okay, so a little bit more on the detail of the methodology, just so you know what we did. To achieve that objective, we conducted a blended quali-quant study online. And when I say quali-quant, what we mean by that is that it's primarily a quantitative study, but it's one that's supplemented with some qualitative exploratory exercises like the ones I just described, so that we're getting robust quantification, but also that depth of understanding. And in that study, we're looking for a balance of about 30% of the contact time being qualitative. So we spoke to over 600 sufferers, so people who have difficulty sleeping at least 2 or 3 times a month. That was across the US and the UK in balanced numbers across different ages and the genders. So representative of sleep sufferers in these 2 markets. And what we covered were essentially so exploratory around the imagery and associations, both visual and verbal in this category, the emotions that are experienced both through bad sleep and through good sleep. As I mentioned, a detailed exploration of their routines, the products and the categories that they use to help them to get better sleep. And then in terms of their needs, so what are especially some of their unmet needs and potential solutions. And as I mentioned, we've included some of our visual exploratory techniques to help us get a depth of understanding. And on top of that, we of course use standard questions as well. Okay, so enough about what we did. Let's go into the main results from our study. So we're first going to look at people's struggle with the condition itself. So what does sleeplessness look like? How does it impact them in their lives? Well, sleeplessness is actually a very common issue. So across the sample, we had about 4 in 10 who have been suffering with problems sleeping for longer than 5 years. So high incidence and going on for quite some time. But the interesting thing is that it's not always a formally diagnosed condition. So only around half have spoken to a doctor about it, and a similar number go on to being diagnosed with a primary sleep disorder, the most common ones being insomnia and sleep apnea. And what are the causes of sleeplessness? Well, we alluded to some of them already in terms of the hectic pace of modern life, but it's the stress and anxiety that causes. So it's the pace of life, it's also work, general problems switching off. But for 8 in 10, it's really about stress and anxiety causing them to have issues with their sleep. Some other things that people mentioned were things like depression, issues with chronic pain. Certainly technology or overuse of technology was in there also, and use of things that are stimulants such as caffeine and alcohol, which can affect sleep patterns. One of the first things we did was to have sufferers create a collage using our e-collage technique. And this was to help get an understanding of the visual and verbal associations that they have with good sleep and bad sleep, to really sort of understand the landscape of sleep from a sufferer perspective. That exercise, you saw the demo there working on a tablet. It takes around 3 or 5 minutes for someone to complete this exercise. And what they're basically doing is selecting images that are meaningful to them to help them tell us their story, putting them onto a virtual collage, and then telling us about that collage. So using those images as a catalyst to help them to articulate. So on this next slide, what you can see is a high-level analysis of that collaging. So what you can see are the top images that were selected across the collages to describe good sleep on the left and bad sleep on the right. And then the key themes that emerged when we looked at how people described good sleep, how people described their collages. And you can see that when consumers talk about good sleep, they're talking about feeling relaxed and rested and refreshed, and all that leads to feeling happier and better mood. And then on the converse, so what does bad sleep look like? Well, consumers expressed a range of negative emotions, including anxiousness, being depressed, irritation, and low energy. So really some very stark differences and some very emotive feelings there. So what I'm just going to show now are just 2 examples from the collaging exercise. So this was how 2 people described the collages that they created, and you can kind of see the richness of the feedback that we got there. And remember that we had about 600 of these because it was a quantitative study. So again, you can see that good sleep makes you feel relaxed, confident, ready to take on a new day, and equally, bad sleep makes you irritable, exhausted, anxious, frustrated, or feeling out of control. So this is the problem, essentially. So now moving on into some of the solutions that people are using to help them to get better sleep. The first thing that we did was we used a diary approach. So we used a retrospective sleep diary to get them to tell us what their typical sleep routine is. And you can see the main quantified elements of that here. So many follow the same routine nightly. That was quite interesting, hoping that routine will help them to get better sleep. But what's interesting is that actually some of those things in the routine are actually things that we're now learning through wider research are not good things to do in terms of sleep hygiene. So for example, in the activities there, you can see 30% watching TV before trying to go to sleep, and another 25% doing something on their mobile phone. So perhaps actually storing up trouble in their routine. You can see obviously some of the sort of basic things that we all know are part of our sleep routine. So basic hygiene before bed, pre-bed hygiene, and medication made it into this typical routine as well for about 3 in 10. And then a further 2 in 10 mentioned taking a drink, and this was typically a warm drink. In the UK it was tea, you might be surprised to know, bedtime herbal teas, that sort of thing, or warm milk, or indeed water or something like that. I'm just showing you now on this next slide some of the diary entries from our sleep diary. And as I mentioned, in this study, we used a one-off retrospective diary, whereas if you conducted a similar study like this, again, in client work, we might employ something that's actually more longitudinal. So for example, something like a mobile ethnographic sleep diary, get sufferers to capture actual routines over a number of days or even over a number of weeks. So that's the routine. When we ask people directly about their use of sleep aids, we actually see that it's much higher incidence. So if you remember on that previous slide, 30% sort of said typically part of their routine was some kind of medication. Well, actually, ask them outright what they're currently doing to get better sleep, and prescription medication, OTC medication, and supplements are mentioned by around half in the UK and around 3/4 in the US. So it's high incidence usage of these sleep aid categories. In the study, we collected a lot of detailed quantified usage information. We can't share it all with you, but what we're here showing are the top products that were used in each of those categories by the different markets, OTC and RX. And you can, for OTC and RX, you can see there are market differences that we might expect in line with how those markets are structured. For example, retailers such as Boots and Asda having their own brand in the UK. But in the supplements, what was interesting was that the UK was perhaps a little sort of milder in terms of the supplements they were taking, so more herbal, chamomile and calms, which is a natural remedy, whereas the US were using some sort of more chemical compounds, so things like melatonin supplements and magnesium supplements. Another interesting finding for us was that this is a repertoire category. So people don't just have one sleep aid that they're using. In fact, they're actually currently using a range of things across prescription, OTC, and supplements. And what that suggested to us was that sufferers are still trying to find the thing that's right for them. So taking a mixture of things. So that was interesting. And in terms of frequency, so we've got a high incidence category. We've also got a high frequency category. So 80% there, 8 in 10, are saying they take something at least once a week across the sleep aid category as a whole, and actually relatively high proportions taking something daily. So 45% having a prescription sleep aid. So high incidence, high frequency, but, and this was one of the most interesting things for us, satisfaction with what people are taking is actually relatively low. You can see the numbers there for RX, prescription, OTC, and the supplements. So less than a third in the US were satisfied with the OTC medication they were taking, and that was even lower at 19% in the UK. And these satisfaction levels, they really surprised us. They're a lot lower than we see in many other categories, suggesting something's amiss. And so when we asked sufferers, why they're not satisfied, the main things that were coming up is that the medication is either not working at all or working inconsistently, particularly in terms of them waking up throughout the night. And one of the real key findings was that in terms of after effects, so how they feel the next day. And if you remember from the good sleep, bad sleep collages, they want to feel rested and restored and ready to take on the day. Well, actually, for over a third of them, that's not the case. And even though they're taking medication, they are still feeling not rested the next day. We got them to conduct another creative exercise, really to broaden things out. So we used a technique that we call configurator, that's also visual. To get them to create their ideal sleep toolkit. And what we were trying to do here was really see other tangential things, as well as sleep aids that were in people's repertoires, and get some learnings there, and also to focus in on unmet needs. So through this exercise, what we found was that sleep aids are really just a small proportion of a wider range of things that people consider to help them get a good night's sleep. So along with the pills and medications of the category, people were selecting images that related to their environment. So it was things like bedding, comfortable bedclothes, a comfortable environment in terms of temperature, and other things that help them relax, like music, even their pets were mentioned by some. So really, this type of exercise allowed us to get a much more holistic understanding of what that looks like for them. again, just an example really of the richness that we get through allowing people to do an exercise like this and then describe how the images and what it means to them. This was a 55-year-old man, and you can see that there was a lot of richness coming through there. Okay, I'm going to sort of come into the opportunity areas now, more for OTC products specifically. We started with a spontaneous question on what's important in an OTC remedy. You can see the top mentions here. So affordability was top. Yeah, that's interesting. Price comes into lots of categories, but maybe there's something here due to the high frequency that people are taking them. No after effects and drowsiness, mentioned by 40% and followed by effectiveness. Now that's really interesting for us, and it's rare that we see absence of side effects trumping efficacy in terms of things that are important, and that again gives us a clue that there's an issue here. Other things that are important that were coming up: natural products and ingredients, and of course trusted brand. That's always important in medication categories. Other things that came up that didn't make the slide, you know, non-addictive, safe, fast-acting, the duration the product works for, and so on. We also quantified that, so that was a spontaneous question, but yeah, we quantified all the different importance dimensions for OTC products. Here you can see the table stakes, and a lot of them are the same from the spontaneous exercise, so affordability, trusted brand, safe to use, and so on. But of course, you know, quant allows you to do opportunity analysis and confirms what we learned through some of the more exploratory exercises, which is that absence of after effects was one of the key elements where satisfaction didn't match importance in this category. And that's particularly not feeling groggy the next day and not having that daytime sleeplessness the next day. There's some other things too, so things like causing constipation, causing dry mouth, and made from natural ingredients, again, pops as an opportunity area in this category. As I mentioned, because it's a quantitative study, we had lots of standard questions in there as well, and we include them so that we've got lots of profiling and targeting information. So here, for example, is where they shop. You can see the importance of Walmart and Boots in the relative markets. And another question for targeting is the importance of different channels for reaching them with information or communications. So here we can see, online, of course, is important, but also the role of advocacy. So friends and family, pharmacists and doctors. And you can probably spot there, but for the UK, pharmacists are really key. So they're a key gatekeeper in the OTC category. In the US, the doctor and TV advertising were slightly more salient. Okay, just a couple of minutes now. I'm just going to sort of wrap up and take you through the main learnings of our study and open up for questions. Okay, so our study highlighted the variety of routines and rituals that consumers have to help them sleep better. And we learned that OTC products are really just one aspect of that routine, and that's important to bear in mind if you're active in this category. So how do products fit into those wider repertoires of sleep hygiene in terms of prescription medications, supplements, lifestyle approaches, and those things that are there to create a relaxing and comfortable environment. At the end of the day, people are doing these things because they want to feel relaxed and refreshed the next day, and that's really important to remember that end benefit. That then leads us into the main opportunity areas. We learned that satisfaction was low, and it was principally around that issue of side effects of feeling groggy, drowsy the next day. But there were also opportunities around efficacy and the duration of how long the product lasts, i.e. lasting through the night. And again, that end benefit coming through. And I think in terms of those side effects, I think in this category, I'd want to understand a little bit more about how much is that down to people not doing the right thing in terms of following the instructions. And so if I was a brand owner, I'd want to know how much is it about educating people versus actually improving the product. And then in terms of the beyond efficacy and side effects, natural ingredients and natural benefits were something that came to the fore. And that's something that can potentially differentiate in this category. And of course, you always have to remember how much trust is a factor in a market like this. So in terms of product and delivering on the key benefits, that's also an important part of the story. But the other thing that we learned, and it's really important, is that when positioning in this category and when communicating with sufferers, it's really important to leverage some of these key emotional needs that were coming out for refreshment, for relaxation, and for comfort, for being able to take on the next day, and these sorts of things which ladder to confidence and general well-being and better mood. So that's really how to create compelling positioning and communication. So we hope you found that study interesting and everybody got a little something from it. And we hope it demonstrates for you in terms of our sort of blended quali-quant approach, how that could maybe be something that allows you to be a bit more agile. So rather than doing separate qualitative for depth of understanding and then robust quantification, trying to skip those steps and do something in one study. So yeah, in terms of where we ended up, we had foundational understanding into people's routines and experiences. We had that really in-depth understanding of behavior and category usage and product usage. And then we had that more emotional understanding through the projective techniques on how to position and differentiate in this category. So thanks very much. I'm just going to throw it back to Melanie to see if we had any questions there. Yeah, Melanie, did we?
We sure did. Thank you so much, Rob.
Okay.
That was wonderful. Okay, now it's time for our Q&A. And if we don't get to your question today, we will be sure to follow up with you afterwards. And if you'd like to have us present to your team on this topic, we can do that too. Just get in touch with us here or email info@buzzback.com. You could also reach out to Rob. His email is on the screen as well. Also, just to reiterate, we will be offering the recording after the presentation, so be on the lookout for an email from us. Okay, Rob, I've got your first question right here. How do you analyze such a large amount of qualitative information from exercises like the collaging that you did?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So actually on the collaging, what we do is actually a mixture of qualitative and quantitative analysis. So if you remember, they actually tell us about their collage by writing a description of how they're feeling about the images that they've used. And so that's coded like a normal coded open question to give us the key themes. But what we'll also have is some quantification of the images. So we know the frequencies of the different image use, and in the study there you saw what we call the image clouds, and you can compare the image use across, we used market, but you can compare across different user groups and that sort of thing as well. We've also done more advanced things like do factor analysis, so combining the themes and the images to see what are the real sort of important elements in a category. What else? Yeah, and actually, personally, I like to just read through those verbatims, and you get a lot of richness, a lot of understanding by just reading through the content.
I actually have a question here related to the open ends, because at the beginning you were mentioning how hard it is to get everyone's attention. Are you finding that response rates are better when you use these types of techniques?
So our response rate's better. I mean that's hard to be definitive because lots of things affect response rates. But what we do know is, because we track things like how enjoyable people found our studies, the satisfaction of taking part in our survey. So we track that across our work, and when we include these types of creative exercises, both enjoyment and satisfaction with doing the research goes up. So that's one way. We know that people are more happy to participate. We've also done a lot of research on our own techniques, and so there's lots of evidence. We know that using them, we get more words into open questions, so people are more engaged and telling us more, and we know that we're getting better types of content, so more emotional language, less rationalized responses. So overall, it does feel that people are more engaged. So if we actually looked at the response rates, I'm sure they would be higher.
Great. And then I just have a few more questions for you because I do realize that we are now going into the next half hour. So just to wrap it up, how many qualitative techniques would you use in a study like this?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. In this one, we used about 6 or 7, which sounds a lot. And the rule of thumb is we at least try to use maybe 3, because what we're trying to do is use different techniques to look at different perspectives, to look at different angles, and to allow people to articulate in ways that are relevant to them. So yeah, about somewhere between 3 and 7. And yeah, overall, in a quali quant study like this, we usually have a balance of about 70% quant, 30% qualitative questions. But even that can vary depending on the objectives, of course.
Mhm. Okay, one last question for you. And it's about the different verticals that Buzzback works within. Have you done similar work with healthcare professionals as well as consumers?
Uh, Short answer, yes, yes. So I'll be transparent. We were a little hesitant at first because we thought, healthcare professionals are serious people, and will they do some of these more lighthearted exercises? But we found that they work, and they work really well. And at the end of the day, surgeons, doctors, specialists, they're people too, and they have emotions, and they're happy to talk about them. We tailor the questions a bit. And frame them in ways that are relevant to those audiences. But at the end of the day, yes, we do, and we get some very good results.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. That was so amazing. And I just want to say to everybody else, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. That is all the time we have. And if you have any other questions about this presentation, or if you have suggestions on future topics you'd be interested to hear more about, please send them our way. You can send them to info@buzzback.com or reach out to Rob directly at rcbold@buzzback.com. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.